Welcome to Public Power Underground, Northwest Public Power's premier weekly infotainment series that covers Northwest Public Power and public power adjacent news. Our series began as an awkward forced fun time for the power department 45 weeks ago when we altered our work arrangements at the start of an ongoing pandemic. It has evolved into a forum to chat with public power professionals about niche topics that are entertaining to an extremely small group of electric utility enthusiasts. And if you found us, that means you. On today's show, we'll get an update on Northwest power markets on Arin Reports and check in on public power and public power adjacent news on Public Power Desktop, where both BPA's Rachel Dibble and PNGC's Roger Gray dropped in to chat about public power news. I'm your host, the voice of the underground, Brian Fawcett. I'm joined by the star of Arin Reports, co-star of Public Power Underground, financial analyst, Arin Guillory. Good afternoon, Arin.
Good afternoon, Fawcett. Happy Thursday. No longer CPUD Friday. Happy Thursday. How's it going?
I'm digging your hat.
Thank
Dunder
you.
McFlynn, representing.
Thank you.
Our other co-star of Public Power Underground, the coding wizard of R and Python, our resident Genesis apprentices, and current power analyst, Ian, the neural network Bledsoe. Thanks for being here, Ian.
Thanks, Brian. I noticed you didn't cue my intro music, though. We'll work on that next time.
We'll talk to the editor about that. I really appreciated your response last week when you said, "I'm happy to be here." I think that was the highlight of last week's show for me. So you set the bar high, and I'm just saying you didn't really achieve it today, but
I put it in my performance review intake form.
Like achievement for 2021 already checked off. You write that in for 2022's performance evaluation? Okay. I lost my place here. You might have to edit this out, Paul.
Probably.
Lastly, the booking agent of Public Power Underground and manager of the power department, Paul Dockery.
Hey, Brian, it's good to be back for another week. I do feel like my booking agent responsibilities are largely like a lost puppy, sending emails around the region, just being like, "Oh, somebody, will you be my friend? Will you be my friend?" And I like people are being my friends. It's great.
They love it. Our 21 viewers hopefully are growing. Have we checked our subscribers recently?
We have increased our subscribers both on the YouTube channel and on podcasts. I checked our stats on the podcast. It is like all of our listeners are in this like 18 to 38 category. It's great. It's hilarious.
That's the typically hard to get group. So I'm killing it.
Does it show like which portions of the podcast they skipped to and watched?
I am looking forward to when they have enough data that they can post that. I think YouTube, I actually can see that to see where they skip to.
Could you not share if they skip certain parts?
I'm sure everybody's skipping to Arin Reports and then just
criticism.
watching Arin Reports and then closing everything down. It is the best content that we put out every week.
Okay, this is just a good news safe space.
Yes, it is.
I was really going to say it's the only segment we have that is reoccurring by the same exact individual. So I don't know that you can really compare it to anything else, but I would expect that folks are going to listen to that and then maybe skip other parts.
Oh man,
Then just skip to the interviews. So all of our banter on the other news topics is always skipped. It's like, oh, we go to Arin, we go to interview, done. And nobody listens to like my tag on out script, but they should because it's great.
And they're probably skipping this stuff right now as we speak. So,
which I respect.
We'll just go ahead.
On the podcast app, you just do 1.5 times. It's a magic. It is absolute magic. The skip 30 is magic.
I typically listen at 1.5 times, and then I listened to our podcast, and I sounded really weird, so I had to slow down to one time, just normal.
I listened to it at 1.5 times, but then I got to Arin Reports, and I had to go back to one time.
Thank you. What an honor.
Oh, what great content. Sorry, we're just filling up blank space here.
Yeah, so people are probably skipping through this anyway. So we will transition to the star of Arin Reports. Arin, what do you have for us this week?
Well, let's get into it. Into the stuff that I have. This is Arin Reports, built to take a few minutes to cover Northwest market indicators for January 28th, 2021. I'm Erin Guillory, and I've got your market update for the week. April-September flows of the Dows are expected to be 826,000 acre feet, a 406 fall from last week, putting the anomaly at 94%. Taking a break from all other dam reporting this week, we'll move right along to our check-in on snow depth in the Canadian Rockies. The Redfish Creek Snow Tell at 6,903 feet elevation last mentioned in British Columbia has a snow depth of 103.9 inches, up about 7 inches from last week with a snow water equivalent of 35.9 inches, similar to the last time reported here, which is about 112% of today's normal. Mid-sea power settled at night around 2182 per megawatt hour. Daylight brought 2548, high 28, low 1975. August power at mid-sea stayed even at 6915 this week compared to 7045 the last time reported on Public Power Underground. Henry Hub February futures opened at 276 per MMBTU yesterday, and August opened at 289. Sumas gas in August closed at about a 24-cent discount to Henry Hub. Translation: mid-sea August power is priced at a 26,000 heat rate. In bond markets, the California Water District recently issued 2 bonds. One bond at a total of $25.215 million, a 1.25% 15-year borrowing with average yields of 125 bips. The CPC maintained a reported ONI of negative 1.3 for October, November, December, with most recent SST departures of negative 1.1 for Nino 3.4 index continues to anticipate a 95% chance La Nina will continue through the duration of winter 2021 and a 55% chance through April to June. Answer D reported a maintained negative 1.06 current index. Spending a beat at Bonneville's balancing authority. Peak load this past week hit 8,700 on January 26th at 8:25 in the a.m., up from 8,600 last week. Wind gen grew 47 megs to 122, and nuclear held steady at 1,200, even with last week's coincident peak for the same hour. The shift continues. The shift continues in NOAA forecast this week. Temp in the region has a 50 to 80% chance of being below normal, while precipitation in the region has a 33 to 50% chance of being below normal in the 6 to 10 day outlook, with a shift anticipated to a 33 to 50% chance of being above normal in the most recent 1 month outlook for NOAA. And that's all we've got for this update. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Arin. Before we kind of talk about some of the actual specifics there, I'm just going to say I'm excited to listen to this tomorrow morning on my way to fishing at 1.5 times. I'm going to take a video of my infotainment deal in my truck, and I'm going to post it on Slack.
Yeah, do it. That would be great.
That would be great.
It's work to watch, so that's billable hours, right?
It's work to watch.
Yeah, so we'll take his fast-paced one and slow it down about 2 notches.
So the snow in the Northwest, though, is not all above average. There is some below average happening in the U.S. Rockies. I was a little surprised that we didn't get more snow there. Is it just not made it there yet? The snow we had earlier this week?
I talked to Mike Kukla of Lucky Peak Power, and he told me it was snowing in Idaho when we were speaking.
It snowed a little bit in Portland on Tuesday.
So I have a question. Well. I know 2 years is not a trend, but this looks eerily similar to last year where we had a lot of snow up in Canada and not very much down in kind of the Idaho area, the Snake River Basin. Is that something that we maybe expect to see due to climate change going into the future, or is it just 2 years coincident in a row?
I don't know how much is driven by climate change. I do think this may be a symptom of La Nina.
Okay.
La Nina would predict that it'd be drier the farther south you get.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes
and
sense.
It's also it's still pretty early. I mean, you can see some of these that are below average. It's still pretty early in the snow year. So there's plenty of chance for it to jump. I was just expecting the system we got here to actually force this up this week still, but maybe next week.
Next up is our weekly walkthrough Northwest Public Power and Public Power adjacent news in a segment we like to call Public Power Desktop.
All right. First, we have Royal Dutch Shell has agreed to buy Ubitricity, which I assume is a portmanteau of Uber and electricity, a leading European provider of on-street charging for electric vehicles. Bridgetricity integrates electric car charging into street infrastructure, such as lampposts, and has more than 2,700 charge points in the UK, giving it a market share of 13%. For more, we're reading the Financial Times, where they note that street charging is expected to expand rapidly as customers who lack private driveways and those that wish to charge their vehicles overnight seek greater options.
Moving right along, PNGC issued a Big Three list of policy priorities on January 19th that included engaging with a broad coalition of the willing to review options for a well-designed Northwestern regional transmission organization and independent system operator. To dig more into the priority, we're happy to welcome the president and CEO of PNGC, Roger Gray, onto Public Power Underground.
Hey, Roger, welcome to Public Power Underground.
Hi, Paul. Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. It seems like, you're in your home office. How's working from home treating you and treating the staff at PNGC?
Well, the most importantly is how is the staff doing? And I think it was an adjustment for everybody, for the office staff, for our power plant workers, is sort of business as usual with some additional precautions. But the office staff we've adjusted. We're going to go to a near 100% virtual. We're selling our building. We're going to get a very small lease space for that's adequate for a couple people who need to have a physical office space. And but we're finding it's working. There's some upsides and downsides. I think the hardest adjustments have been for working parents with kids in the school and the challenges of all those functions, and taking care of being, moms and dads, workers, daycare, and that's much harder. And that's a big social problem, and I think it is for PNGC. But we're working through it, and the team's doing great, and that's what's most important to me. The team seems to be hanging in there.
Yeah, well, I hope you give extra credit to your managers. I have found that it has been hard to manage people in the remote work, and finding new ways to communicate and new ways to lead people has been really fun and challenging.
But the Underground's a great example of how we've successfully modified things and adjusted, and I hope it becomes a permanent institution. So.
Well, I don't know if it'll become a permanent institution or not, but like you mentioned, we got to find innovative ways to communicate. Yeah. And I'll just dive right in. So on the Big Three list of policy priorities that you released on January 19th, one of them was engaging with a coalition of the willing to investigate a possible regional RTO or ISO. And where I was interested, because I've engaged with a lot of your staff in these workshops on the energy imbalance market, is how would an RTO, how would that effort comport with what we've already done on the energy imbalance market? Is it a continuation? Is it reinventing the wheel? And really, it's like I had a lot of high-minded questions for you, but it came down to, we put in a lot of work. Please tell me my work was worthwhile.
No, we're going to start all over.
Yeah.
No, I'll start with maybe the big vision of a Northwest RTO ISO. I put it it's so burning obvious that we need to do it, and we just need to figure out a way to do it and overcome our past failures, which are never technical or economic. They're just institutional, philosophical, and cultural failures of the past. And I can go back almost 20 years and look at the Northwest failers. And I acknowledge just
cultural failures, right? It's easy to overcome cultural failures, right?
They're the hardest, actually, as you know, and philosophical, because they're around beliefs. In fact, anybody who starts their sentence with "I believe something," I basically give up there, because beliefs are hard to change. But going back to your question about EIM, so it's absolutely, so first, perspective on the EIM, great tool, necessary tool. It was wonderful that the Cal ISO and Pacific Core, as the first mover there, developed it, because it does help. There's nothing wrong with having an intra-hour. I call it the virtual BA that sits across multiple BAs, and it helps balance and integrate solar and wind and renewables across the West. And I applaud that effort. It's clearly successful. I would want to make sure it stays. I do think there are some concerns. I have some concerns about the EIM, and there are some really odd things that have happened, like on September 6th, I'm really, really concerned about. They've been dismissed as software errors, and I don't buy software errors as it's a little bit more of that's more disturbing. Software errors need to be investigated, but on a fundamental basis, I think it has to be part of any going forward future in the West. And frankly, a Northwest RTO and a Cal ISO could continue to have an EIM that handles things between the two. If there's two RTOs in the West, an EIM would be a great tool. There's no reason why we would throw it away, and I certainly do not want to start over. But an EIM, I think a lot of people think an EIM is an RTO ISO, and it's not. It's just one of the many elements that would need to be put together in a RTO of the Northwest. And other elements like the planning function, the beyond the hour functions, all those things would need to be put together. And by the way, we have pieces and parts of those throughout the Northwest. I call it, we've got a very balkanized, fragmented system up here. And like the planning, that we have Northern Grid does the planning function that an RTO ISO. We would not want to throw away Northern Grid. In my judgment, we would just want Northern Grid to become part of the Northwest RTO ISO.
So is that a feasible path forward, you think? Because the power pool is also working on a resource adequacy program. So in some ways, you have this balkanized with components.
Yeah.
Is there a feasible way to put these components together?
Yeah, first I start with the vision, and then you ask yourself, the next question is what's the general approach? Is it big bang, everything's brand new, or do you take the pieces and parts and build incrementally? You mentioned another important one is the resource adequacy function. The RTO ISOs around the nation have that as a function. They have different ways of approaching it. The pool is making good progress on that. I applaud that. I do not see the RTO effort. Some people have called the RA resource adequacy a kind of a first step and I said, so my saying with that analogy or metaphor, I'd say, okay, yeah, it's a first step, it's a good step, but is it the last step? In other words, I see the RTO ISO as a staircase, and RA can be a really good step in that staircase, but it's not the last step. But we also want to ask ourselves, where is the staircase going? What's our vision? And I really think that's where we need to have a comprehensive vision. We support the RA effort. But as I always say, Paul, the angel is in the details. And I really think that the RA effort, absent that strategy and vision, is really hard, because we're struggling, I'm not a pool member, but someone in the stakeholder committee, they're struggling with really difficult issues like, where's the point of compliance? How do you deal with free rider problems? How do you make it voluntary? It becomes how do you deal with FERC jurisdiction, or do you just try and work around FERC jurisdiction? I personally, I'm tired of that conversation. We should embrace FERC jurisdiction and just get on with the conversation. I'm tired of the nonsensical, oh, we can't have FERC jurisdiction. That's just it's a conversation that, in my opinion, is just stupid. So
we need to move past, and I'm willing to move past it with you. So how do you envision like the engagement of the broad coalition of the willing?
Yeah.
So I'm willing to talk to you about it. I'm willing to engage with PNGC. I'm a little podunk utility, but how do you envision that collaboration, and what forum does it take?
So I'm reaching out to, when you invited me to this forum, the underground, I welcome it, because that's the beginning of the conversation. You characterize you all as podunk. PNGC is maybe a little bit, maybe we're podunk 1.2. We're pretty small. We're transmission dependent like you are, and we care deeply about transmission access and functioning markets. I would say small. Well, I'll say the small but mighty utilities. I prefer that to podunk, but we'll call it small but mighty. We care and need transmission access and the functioning markets more than the big boys and girls. Frankly, they have transmission that they own. They have access to markets that they can reach. So I think it's a deep concern for transmission dependent utilities like us, or TDUs. And so I'm reaching out to TDUs, I'm reaching out to preference customers. Ultimately, I think that the conversation has to include Bonneville, because they're 75% of the Northwest grid. And I think it's going to include the investor-owned utilities. I hope they would consider this conversation. I know that generators are similar to TDUs. Generators that are only generators are concerned about market access and transmission access. And of course, the state regulators, because of the IOUs. Once you get the IOUs in the conversation, state regulators and state policymakers. So that's where it gets complex. But I think that to me, the overwhelming evidence in the form of studies, Paul, and as well as the empirical evidence says we really need to do this. And so let's just get on with it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective and kind of the thinking through how this comports with an EIM and all the work we've done helps me get more willing to have this conversation. So
yeah, I like the EIM. It has to be. It's why rebuild that. It's a great tool. But I mentioned there's some weird things that are happening with it that need to be understood. But those are why you just have good technical and economic and market people work through those issues. But we need to have a day ahead market eventually. We need to deal with transmission more effectively. If we're going to close tens of thousands of megawatts of gas and coal and bring on tens of thousands of megawatts of wind, solar, and whatever capacity is going to back all that up, I know that all the studies show we need a lot of transmission, and we need to have an institutional structure like an RTO that gets it planned, gets it cost recovered, and gets the allocation of cost out to the users like you and me. So.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the perspective that these functioning markets are, core of core importance to utilities like ours that are, dependent on transmission. So thanks for providing that insight. These are meant to be short conversations. This has been a great nugget. Are you willing to come back and chat some more? You're a longstanding friend of the Underground, and I really very much appreciate your support.
You bet. I really appreciate the opportunity, Paul. And, I'm always willing to chat about just about anything. And hopefully you don't have to do too much editing I don't think I dropped the F-bomb this time. So hopefully not too much editing, but
no, this has been absolutely great. The only hard parts are my parts that I'll have to edit out.
Okay.
Thanks
again, for the opportunity. We'll see you.
Great discussion with Roger Gray. It was great to have him on. This was covered by Clearing Up in their most recent publication. Great summaries. Watch us, read them. It's a great combination.
In the latest episode of APPA's podcast, Public Power Now, Doug Hunter, the CEO and General Manager of Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, otherwise known as UAMPS, talks about their carbon-free power project, which calls for the development of small modular reactors. It is unclear based on APPA's podcast page whether Public Power Now is evolving to a rebranded Public Power X podcast series or if APPA will be offering a new podcast series. Public Power Underground is excited for either option, and if anybody knows people at APPA who work on the podcast, please let them know Public Power Underground is subscribed and would love to do some low post BS report style crossovers. Mad props.
Gotta love those crossovers, right, Brian?
That's right.
I love low post BS crossovers.
An article by Sherry Listgarden delved into the reason there seems to be a lot more interest in EVs than heat pump water heaters. The author lays out some reasons, including their lack of visibility. Even if heat pump water heaters were cool, nobody could see them. Installers wanting to stick to what they know, or installation expense. For more info, see the article in Palo Alto Online.
So it was illuminating to me that virtue signaling was probably one of the reasons that heat pump water heaters were not that popular, really resonated, made me laugh. Great article to read through.
It's very on brand for Public Power Underground, a reference to virtue signaling.
I was going to start with, this will probably get cut out, and I just didn't.
Well, we're going to have to cut this now. I was, fact checking her numbers and doing the calculations, and heat pump water heater efficiency since I was in the game has increased more than 30%, which is dang. And the price, like even without rebates, the price of a 50-gallon heat pump water heater was like $100 less than an equivalent gas water heater, which is like, oh. And looking at, like in Palo Alto, where the author resides, the rebates for heat pump water heaters are more than twice the cost of the heat pump water heater itself. So it's like,
really,
virtue signaling aside, it's like there's a lot of reasons to install a heat pump water heater.
So do you think the rebate would cover a large portion of the installation? Because I do assume it's really expensive to install one of these things if you're going to use a plumber to do it.
I think it can be expensive if you're replacing a gas water heater, it probably is pretty expensive because you don't have the existing electrical. If you already have just a normal electric water heater, it's not too bad because you don't have to add the breaker and the wiring and that sort of thing.
But if the rebates double, is that enough to pay for a plumber even to come to the house? Because I don't know that I would want to like swap out a regular water heater for a heat pump water heater by myself. Or is that a thing people do?
I think what we see is electric to electric conversions, but like the average install cost that I was seeing was like $500 or $600, which if you don't have to upgrade your panel should be okay. One of the things the author recommended was when you're looking for a heat pump water heater, especially to replace a gas water heater, just look for heat pump water heaters that have require a 15 amp circuit. You don't need to find a water heater that requires a bigger size circuit. So
yeah, but like, is it that if I get the bigger amp circuit, it'll heat faster and better? Because mad respect for the efficiency. I want to save money. I also really want warm water and hot water when I want it. So it's like a 15 amp circuit going to not have as good of response to heating water.
Even the 30 amp heat pump water heaters have like a first hour rating, which is basically how fast they heat up water, half of what a gas water heater has. So
means slower is half worse.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. But if I already have an electric one, if I already have an electric electric water heater, how's that rating compare?
It's pretty comparable, I think. And that for a 30 amp heat pump water heater, because they have, the reason you have a 30 amp circuit is because it's got large heating elements in it to, boost the recovery if it's needed. But if you put it in like heat pump only mode and then drain all the hot water out of it, in heat pump only mode, it takes like 8 hours to recover to 120 degrees, which is, it's almost like plug pass.
Hey, I love plug pass. We kept cutting you off, Brian. What did you have something? We kept cutting you off.
It was essentially that point that I think most of the time they're assuming you're not going to use the coils in there, so you don't have to get a heat pump or a heat pump water heater with big enough coils if you don't think you're going to use them. The 30 amp one is if you are often going to be needing a lot of hot water at one time, like if you have a big play or something like that.
I'm glad we came back to this because this is really good advice. Choose a larger size than you might normally choose. That's good advice right there. Okay, you ready, Brian? Let's move on.
I am. The Northwest Power Pool's Resource Adequacy Program is a topic that fascinates us at Public Power Underground. So in a follow-up to our discussion of the program with eWeb's Susan Ackerman, we made a new friend. To talk more about the Power Pool's Resource Adequacy Program and what it could mean for load-serving entities like ours is the newest friend of the Underground and Director of Market Initiatives at BPA, Rachel Dibble.
Hey, Rachel, welcome to Public Power Underground.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Now, BPA is notorious for like the back-to-back meetings all day long. Has it gotten any better that you're remote and doing all virtual, or is it still action-packed all day long?
No, I think in some ways it's even worse because they know you don't have to walk from room to room. So it's like you don't need any downtime, right? Just start that next one up and schedule through lunch and
and just turn off your video and go to the bathroom and then that's a
hope
trick I made.
You're muted. Hope that you're muted when you do that.
Have friends that will text you if you aren't muted. That is also a key I've found in the pandemic. You got to have friends.
Yeah.
So thank you for being
barking,
a friend. I loved, I was on one. I think your dogs are barking in the background. And one thing I want to say is next time you just invite the dog. We want to see the dog, we want to meet the dog.
Yeah. Well, she's old and she mostly just sleeps all day. But of course, as soon as I am on a video, that's when she starts freaking out and barking. So
Of course.
Never fails.
Never fails. Well, I'll dive right in because I do respect your time. So I've had this question before. I think it'll be a recurring question that we ask experts about. It's about resource adequacy. So the Northwest Power Pool has done a good job developing a resource adequacy program. There's been a lot of presentations in the region about the strategic importance of a regional resource adequacy program. But I wanted to talk to some people about the value proposition for load serving entities within a BA. Bonneville's got a lot of different load serving entities all within your BA. I was hoping for your perspective on kind of the overall overarching way to think about a value proposition for an entity like mine and like others like ours.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think you're right that we have stayed up at a higher level because anytime you're talking about this kind of regional initiatives for individual utilities, the business case is kind of three-tiered, right? You have, because something that's a benefit to the region does flow down, something that's a benefit or creates a cost, either one. Something that's a benefit or a cost to Bonneville flows down. So when you're looking at your individual utility business cases, those are really important and you have to kind of take care of them at your own level, but you can't lose sight of the fact that it's compounded with the other layers. But just in the sense of what each individual utility would be looking at, I'm thinking specifically more of the slice customers than load following. Although load following I think is really important. But for us, we consider that we, through our contracts, already have an obligation to be planning for the load following customers in a different way than we do for slice customers. And so for load following customers, the resource adequacy program is intended to be pretty transparent. That we feel like we already take on that obligation. And so we will continue to do that. And we're looking at this program as a potential better way to fulfill those obligations. But for slice customers, it's different, and block customers. And so I think for those customers, you really do need to look at your individual business cases. And I think just to start with, it starts with that premise that we're all planning responsibly, right? We know what we have to what responsibilities, what obligations we have, and we're all doing our best to try and make sure that we're planning for those responsibly. And so if you start with that premise, you should look at the idea that planning from a whole regional basis should allow you to plan for less when it comes to your share of that regional. So that's that regional diversity. It came up in EIM. It comes up in this as well, that when you're looking at a much bigger footprint with geographic diversity and weather diversity, all of those things, there's the potential that you could be planning for less.
So in some ways, is it that planning reserve margin that we use in planning? We could have a smaller one is kind of the conceptual framework.
Exactly. And when E3 did a kind of a study for the 2A phase of this program, they did find that we're looking at a couple percentage points. The potential for a couple percentage points of savings for individual utilities when you look at their share of a regional resource adequacy standard as opposed to just planning on their own. So that gave us the confidence that this is something worth looking for. To, a couple of percentage points can be a big deal, especially in those really high peak times. A couple percentage points can make a big deal.
And definitely when it's scaled up to a regional area, that couple percentage point ends up being, a project or two in all possibility.
Right, in the long run, exactly. And then I think you start looking at, so the forward showing part of the program, there are opportunities if you have additional capacity, if you tend to have points in time where you have surplus capacity, that this program would create a new opportunity for you to be able to sell that. If you're on the opposite side of that transaction where you need additional capacity in that forward showing time frame, this creates a new platform or a new program where there are going to be entities there willing to sell. And if we're all thinking about that potential future state where the markets are getting tighter, and just having a program that has several members that are saying, yep, we're going to be here and we're going to be offering and selling capacity in this platform, I think is a value to everyone.
Yeah,
what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was thinking in the terms of timing and how the products will, or how the timing will work compared to like the Bonneville contract expiration, and the looking out at a planning reserve margin in future years. It kind of ends up compounding with all the other discussions we have in the region, right? Around what's going on and what the future will look like.
Yeah, and that's that, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can't ignore the regional drivers for this either.
Right.
When you're looking at your individual company business cases, those regional drivers are really important. And so then if you move on into the operational time frame, again, that same concept, if you purchase from the market right now to meet your needs, we all have pretty general consensus that in the future, the spot market is not going to be the same with the changes in the resource mix in the region, with the large dispatchable generation being retired in many cases, and it being replaced with the variable generation because of, and those standards are just continuing to get more aggressive.
Yep.
That spot market isn't going to be what it is today. There's very likely to be much more volatility, if not just less available. And so this is yet another program. This is an opportunity for you to be part of a program where you have a large number of entities across the region that are saying, yep, we're committing to hold this amount based on forward showing, and we're committing to have that available for compensation,
right,
to in the operational time frame when it starts to get really tight and close to the hour, that you have a group of partners that have committed to holding a certain amount, having it available for sale. And then if you look at the cost side, we are contemplating this to be a relatively low cost program. This isn't the EIM,
right,
where we have a lot of major IT upgrades that we needed to do to be able to participate. It's not a market where you have the optimization engine that you have to put in place. We're looking at things more along the lines of data feeds, billboard functions.
Okay.
And we've been pretty vocal in the program development itself that we want to keep it pretty simple to begin with. It's pretty important to us that we keep it keep it simple, get some wins, get a program in place that we feel like we can kind of test it out and make sure it's working, but keep it flexible enough that over time we could expand it and make it something more significant as we go through time.
Do you expect in those initial offerings for the number of voluntary participants to be smaller and then to grow in the number of participants over time? Or are you thinking more along the lines of have the administrative burden small at the beginning and then maybe expand the administrative components to be more expansive? What do you mean when you mean expand? Are you talking participants or features?
I think it's both. I think it's both of those things. I think that we've seen all of these different market functions. We've purposely kind of stepped slowly into them. Yep. I mean, we didn't do the RTO ISO. We've had many tries at that in the region. And what we've found works for this region is to slowly step into some of the features. And RA is just another example of that, this is a feature that tends to be an RTO or an ISO function. We are trying to put it in place without that infrastructure. But just as we go forward in time, if the region feels like there's the desire to expand this, that we should have that optionality to be able to do that. But also the geographic footprint. There's been interest from outside of the Northwest region. We're not including them in this phase of it right. because we're keeping it to the Northwest Power Pool members and this footprint. But there have been some outside the Northwest region who have said, hey, I might be interested in that in the future if this was something you guys were willing to expand.
Yeah, really interesting. And I like the kind of the take that liquidity and the being able to find people to transact with may be easier right. as well.
Right.
And could be another area of value proposition for those that are occasionally long and occasionally short. Maybe it's a little right. bit easier to manage both sides of your book.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's certainly true for Bonneville. I mean, I think we think about Bonneville as always being surplus, but sometimes Bonneville is in positions where we need supply as well.
Yeah.
So I think that it's always important to remember that we could be on both sides of this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you again for the perspective.
Yeah.
And hope maybe you're willing to come back and talk about other topics. Maybe after the rate case is over, we can talk about those type of topics. Not today, of course. And I'm really glad that you're willing to be a friend of the underground. It's at some point we may get like coffee mugs so we can see the mugs on the other end of the screen.
Yeah, that would be exciting.
Great fun.
Yeah, I was very flattered to be invited, and I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm a 50-something Gen X mom of 2 young adults, so any association with the underground, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, we like to consider ourselves hip. That's
right.
what we like to consider ourselves at Clatskanie PUD. That's what we do. Super trendy. But thank you again, and great to have you.
Thank you.
PPA has published their 2020 Public Power Salary Survey. It can only be purchased by members at a $75 cost. I don't know how one would qualify as member, but I do know, as one repeat guest on Public Power Underground has said, got to know your worth. You can find a link to a summary of results in Wednesday, January 27th issue of Public Power Daily Newsletter under the What Do Public Power Workers Earn headline.
GameStop shares soar amid battle between short sellers and Reddit's amateur investors. It's uncertain who fired the first shot, but war has been declared between short sellers of GameStop, NYSE, GME, and non-traditional investors subscribing to Reddit's R Wall Street Bets. Traditional traders attribute the rise to a YOLO pump and dump strategy orchestrated on social media, but some call it social justice against short sellers who go on national TV to talk people into joining their side of the trade, what some power analyst calls slump and dump, aka talking your own book. What's for certain is that short sellers have been getting destroyed as GME rises and they're forced to cover their short positions. Last I heard it was like 3 billion short sellers have lost.
I heard 13.
Huh? 13
I heard
now?
13 billion. That was yesterday. That was probably right here.
Yeah. So a lot more short sellers have been forced to close their position.
This is an evolving story. It's an evolving story. Robinhood, the retail transacting app, has shut down your ability to buy retail stock using their app, and are in fact closing some option positions.
I would just like to also point out that the rise is almost certainly a bubble due to a lack of underlying fundamentals supporting it, causing some traders to continue to short the stock as it rises, and as it rises further, continue to lose money. So far, the buyers have been able to continue pumping the stock, causing short positions to continue hemorrhaging money. When the bubble bursts, investors have the possibility of losing their entire stake, but for short sellers, the risk is much greater, infinite, since there is no cap on price.
Okay, a record $754 million of venture capital was invested in the vertical farming industry in the first 3 quarters of 2020, according to news reports by the Financial Post that we found in NWPPA's always enlightening Energy News Digest. The cost of energy can be a major hurdle to profitability of vertical farming, which has led vertical farmers to try to find light bulb suppliers who can reduce power use. For now, the produce is targeted at the world's wealthy elite and works best with microgreens and herbs because of their rapid and simple crop cycles, rather than higher caloric foods like squashes and melons.
It's also the case that LEDs are much better at growing leafy greens because the intensity of fruit is much higher, so you need like HPS. I also saw an interesting story that coal country is turning a lot of coal warehousing space into these vertically green farms, basically. And they were saying that it was perfectly positioned in, geographically to be within 1 day's drive of like 80% of the population of the US, which sounds good.
All right. Breaking news. Friends of the underground. Matt Shretnick informed the Underground that eWeb is hiring, calling all friends of the Underground. Spread the word that eWeb is hiring for the position of Energy Resource Analyst to support regional policy and initiative engagement. The position is based out of the beautiful Eugene, Oregon. If you know someone looking for a purposeful life in public power, send them eWeb's way.
This is such breaking news that it isn't even listed on their website yet as an opportunity. You heard it first here, folks. You heard it first here.
We're breaking news on Public Power Underground. I like it.
It's all happening. I need to figure out how to get like a banner, like the scrolling banner with breaking news. I don't know if I'm that good actually at editing. Probably am not. You'll know whether I'm good enough to pull that off as you watch this on YouTube. But if you're listening to a podcast, don't worry, I didn't pull it off anyway. Just keep listening. Just skip this actually.
All right, that's all the news we're covering this week. Send us any news, jobs, questions, or opinions you'd like us to cover next week to Paul on Twitter @thepowermanager, or if you're a friend of the Underground, send any of us a note. Public Power Underground has expanded to podcasts. Not only can you find us on our YouTube channel, you can also subscribe, rate, comment, and listen to your favorite performative pandemic public power series through your favorite podcast app. And if you've stumbled across Public Power Underground and want to get notified directly in your inbox when new episodes are published, you can sign up on Substack at publicpowerunderground.substack.com. If you would like to be removed as a friend of the Underground, you can send Paul an email with the subject line, "New phone, who this?" That's the subject line, "New phone, who this?"
Who this? Who
To
this?
Paul Dockery. I know, I thought I had to look back.
Oh, man.
Yeah, like why? I figured you just do it correctly, Brian. I couldn't convince myself to type it as this, but
Yeah.
you
All right, I
go
almost
for it.
said calorific earlier because that's what it was typed as, and then I tried to figure out if you were trolling me. I was just going to say it anyways.
I thought he was
I'm
trolling.
I'm pretty
so
sure
many
that's
times.
how it was written in the news story. Was calorific.
Yeah, I
you-
was like, is calorific like cookies and donuts, or
Is it caloric? It was supposed to be caloric. You corrected it
Yeah.
as caloric, didn't you? Yeah.
I went with caloric, but I do like the word calorific.
I think
I'm not even sure
Me
that's
too.
how it's said.
Yeah, so when you take your Tesla out when it's snowing, Ian, that's why you do cookies instead of donuts. It's a little less calorific.
Yeah.
I was thinking super calorific expialidocious.
Docious,
Mhm.
yeah.
This is great content.
I'm definitely going to use the word. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. And now we have a word from our sponsor.
Public Power Underground is presented by PlugPass. PlugPass is an electric vehicle charging program designed by and for commuters, which makes us wonder why we're promoting it during an ongoing pandemic on a show that's targeted at working professionals who are trying to adjust to a professional isolation of working remotely. Don't let intellectual dissonance stop you from checking out our program today. It may make more sense once we're commuting to work again, but Ian and I keep paying our fixed monthly PlugPass subscription even when we don't use it, because that's what you do when you're a dedicated sponsor who believes in a product like we do. PlugPass, it's open source. PlugPass, it's just an outlet. Public Power Underground is a pandemic version for entertainment purposes. It's written, edited, and produced by the Power Department. The views expressed here are our own and not the official views of Classic and IPUD, nor of any person or organization affiliated or doing business with Classic and IPUD, nor the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. Neither Classic and IPUD nor those appearing on Public Power Underground generate ad revenue from the episodes. It's all just for fun and positive reviews, and for the likes and subscriptions to both the YouTube videos and the podcast feed. So don't be shy about sharing, liking, commenting, 5-star ratings, glowing reviews, forwarding on to friends, signing up on our new Substack page. Just do it all. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.